Hey guys, welcome to the Liberal Hive Mind, a channel solely focused on exposing the abundant hypocrisy of the left. Well folks, Justin Trudeau strikes again. After coming back from Brussels, Belgium, his trip to the European Parliament where he was, completely humiliated. Honestly, I don't even get why Justin Trudeau went to the European Parliament to begin with. I guess he went to go show solidarity with Ukraine and his European allies, but then ended up, of course, doing what Justin Trudeau always does, bashing his domestic political opponents and bashing the truckers. A complete joke, to say the least. But the summation of his trip was show up to the European Parliament, give a speech to essentially an empty room where nobody even showed up, as we covered, bash truckers, then he had to sit down and listen to European Parliament members absolutely roast him, and that's a light, very nice way of saying it. And now here's Justin Trudeau as he gets back home, boasting about his incredibly successful trip to Europe. Successful in what sense? These politicians, these bureaucrats are absolutely useless. They're just faces. Faces that meet other faces and shake hands. A bunch of useless political platitudes sort of spew out of their face holes, and they call it a successful day. What a successful trip. Well, if that is Justin Trudeau's standard for success, then he must be the most successful prime minister in Canadian history, because the guy is absolutely useless, and he continues to get obliterated, roasted on the world stage. Blackface enthusiast Justin Trudeau is the biggest clown on the world stage, like I always say, and let me show you guys exactly what happened. But of course, before we get into any of it, please make sure to leave a like, a comment, subscribe, share the video as much as possible. We are still shadow banned by the YouTube algorithm, hidden from non-subscribed viewers. And with that out of the way, let's roll the tape. Alright folks, take a look at this. Justin Trudeau boasts about successful trip to Europe despite getting called a dictator to his face. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau released a statement on Friday wherein he gave himself a self-congratulatory pat on the back, calling the trip, quote, successful. The Prime Minister was criticized by European politicians over his record on human rights abuses after he delivered a low-energy speech to a quarter-full auditorium of European politicians. That quarter-full auditorium right over here, literally about 25% attendance. But honestly, for Canadian standards, that's just amazing. The fact they got even one person in the room. The Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, today had successfully concluded his trip to Brussels, Belgium. The Prime Minister addressed the European Parliament and participated in an extraordinary North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, summit and a G7 heads of state government meeting, the statement says. On March 23rd, the Prime Minister addressed the European Parliament where he condemned President Putin's war of choice and reaffirmed Canada's steadfast commitment to Euro-Atlantic security, including by calling for further coordinated support for Ukraine in response to Russia's aggression. He spoke of the need to continue working together to promote international peace and security and defend democracy. During his address, the Prime Minister highlighted the close partnership between Canada and the European Union based on our shared values. Shared values, he says. Democracy, he says. Fighting against Russia's despot leader. And of course, exactly as you'd expect, hypocrisy, hypocrisy, hypocrisy. Let's just say after what we saw throughout this winter, Justin Trudeau is the last person to virtue signal about democracy, human rights, and quote, shared values. And that's not me telling you. We covered the Croatian politician who absolutely tore Justin Trudeau a new one. Well, he wasn't the only one. Oh, and by the way, Justin Trudeau had to sit silently, getting absolutely embarrassed during these speeches. When Mislav Kolakusic was absolutely destroying Justin Trudeau, Trudeau was sitting a couple feet away from him, as you guys can see from this picture right over here. And during the second event, with Mrs. Christine Anderson, another member of the European Parliament, representing the Alternative Party for Germany, well, she also piled on while Justin Trudeau had to just sit there and listen, sit there and take it.
Based on Article 195, out that it would have been more appropriate for Mr. Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, to address this House according to Article 144, an article which was specifically designed to debate violations of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, which is clearly the case with Mr. Trudeau. Then again, a Prime Minister who openly admires the Chinese basic dictatorship, who tramples on fundamental rights by persecuting and criminalizing his own citizens as terrorists just because they dared to stand up to his perverted concept of democracy, should not be allowed to speak in this House at all. Mr. Trudeau, you are a disgrace for any democracy. Please spare us your presence. Thank you.
I mean, folks, I am bowing down. This woman is absolutely based. That is Justin Trudeau's standard for a successful European trip. The guy is a complete clown, and she called him out so accurately and right to his face. You shouldn't be here to lecture us about democracy and human rights. You should be here to answer for your violations of democracy and human rights and the rule of law. After his government seized people's bank accounts for merely donating to a peaceful protest, after they used an emergency war act to do it all without court order, based on completely phony, debunked stories of political violence, police in the street on horses trampling over a defenseless old woman. The list of his violations goes on and on and on and on. Yet this phony, empty suit and the smile of a politician continues to virtue signal about values and democracy. Justin Trudeau famously said that his political opponents hold unacceptable viewpoints. The only person who has acted unacceptably and has unacceptable viewpoints is Justin Trudeau himself, and he wouldn't be getting so publicly lambasted if that wasn't the case. Blackface enthusiast Justin Trudeau is the biggest clown on the world stage. God, I love saying that. But of course, if you think it ended there, well, it didn't. Justin Trudeau also getting slammed on a British radio talk show by Mr. Chris Fufas, highlighting the true hypocrisy and the true narrative of Justin Trudeau's European Parliament trip.
I'm surprised he didn't freeze a bank account and have a go at her protesting, because he gave this great long diatribe today against Putin, saying that he wants respect for sovereignty, he wants to have democracy stood for, he wants to stay true to these values, he wants to fight for that all over the world. This was a man that basically froze the bank accounts of truckers, decided that he was going to forcibly round them up. He took tactics directly out of the rule book of Vladimir Putin to deal with his own people. And then he has the audacity and the lack of self-awareness to stand at a podium and tell us that he wants to fight for sovereignty and democracy. He's a hypocrite, he has a neck made of brass, and he's a moron. And he's a plank.
He really is. He's been on this show already this year for some of the actions that he's taken. So for him to be on it yet again...
The audacity and a clear lack of self-awareness, but really that's not what it is. It's typical liberal politician. They are never held accountable for their actions. They feel as though they can get away with anything. I mean, Justin Trudeau's political supporters were essentially cheering it on, egging it on, as the Liberal Party of Canada cracked down on peaceful protesters. And for the most part, it's kind of like Joe Biden. Most people aren't even paying attention to what he's saying and what he's doing. And so when Justin Trudeau comes back home and says, a successful trip, most people are probably not even aware of the humiliation that he suffered. But that, my friends, is definitely the story here. Justin Trudeau's trip to Europe was totally embarrassing, utter humiliation for a man who he himself is an embarrassment to the country of Canada and the values that he purports to represent. An absolute hypocrite and petty tyrant. But of course, that's what I got for you. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave a like, a comment, subscribe, share it as much as possible. We are still shadow banned by the YouTube algorithm, hidden from non-subscribed viewers. But like usual, I'm gonna get back to work. Thanks for watching, friends, and I will see you on the next one.